calendar for next week?
What is it, 5,000?
Oh yeah, the year is 5773 according to the Jewish calendar. We're going to talk about the Jewish calendar.
Yeah, well, next time is, oh, wait a minute, what's today?
Today is the 9th.
Are we just moving them up, or what?
No, today's the 20th, right?
Right, it was supposed to be life cycle events.
Today was supposed to be
Right.
life cycle of it? Oh yeah,
But
we
before
changed the calendar.
Yeah,
Actually, I should print you out a new
the Jewish
calendar.
calendar was next one,
Yeah.
the 26th.
So we changed up the calendar a little bit to balance it out, so I'll bring that next week.
Oh,
Just to make up for it. So we'll be doing the calendar next week and then moving to life cycle events.
okay.
Or something like that. We'll get there. It'll be grand.
You know, I have the,
Thank
do
you.
I have the old one?
Do you have a copy, or you can make a couple copies of this? Thank you so much. Okay. Yeah, so next week we're doing the Jewish calendar, then we're doing Hanukkah, then Jews and Christmas, and then life cycle events.
This one is,
You got it? This is the updated one? Thank you so much. Here you go. Thank you. So, the first thing is, back before we had clocks, we had to know precisely when a day would start and when a day would stop. And as well in the Torah, in the book in creation, it says there was evening and then there was morning, day one. From that we learn that day starts in the evening and ends. So you have night and then you have day. So on the Jewish calendar, dates will start at sundown and end at sundown the next day. So the Sabbath in Judaism goes from sundown on Friday until sundown on Saturday. And with sacred times, because we want to make sure we don't do profane things in the sacred times, we make the days 25 hours. So we observe the Sabbath from literally sundown until an hour or so past sundown on Saturday to make sure we're not missing anything. So anyways, that's the Jewish Sabbath. Christians take Sunday, and people mistakenly call it the Sabbath, but it's not actually the Sabbath. It's a different concept. It's called the Lord's Day. It's a day that was devoted, that was actually polemic to make sure that people aren't doing it on the Sabbath and secretly celebrating the Sabbath. But the idea is that when Jesus came, he said, you no longer have to follow the laws of the Torah. You're no longer obligated to that. So celebrating the Sabbath would be one of those things you're no longer obligated to do, but there are certain other Christian obligations. So the Lord's Day, which is celebrated on Sunday, and some people will call it the Sabbath, is not the same Sabbath that the Jewish people refer to. And so you get a group like Seventh-day Adventists, they're going back to the Sabbath in a sense. They're taking back some of that Jewish law upon themselves. So that's when the Sabbath is. Are there any questions on that?
Yeah, I have one. Where'd it go?
And I'll tell you if we'll answer that in a bit.
Did Christ leave out? He didn't leave out the Ten Commandments. Did he? I mean, he was talking more about.
To be honest, I'm not 100% sure.
He restates the Ten Commandments, but doesn't call them
By that name.
right.
Yeah.
There are parts of the gospel where he talks about. It's just a restating.
Okay.
And I think the ones that Jesus takes is their teachings of love, like make sure you love your neighbor and be kind to your neighbor, which in those teachings would include thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not steal. So I think the Ten Commandments then, in the form that they appear, they count as a mitzvot, the legal system, the commandments that no longer need to be followed, but then there's a new set of teachings. But also just a linguistic theological point. Jews will not refer to Jesus as Christ, because Christ, that term means Messiah. Christians believe that Jesus was the Messiah, so Christ is appropriate for Christians. Jews do not believe that Jesus was the Messiah, so we would not refer to him as Christ. But we don't deny that he existed. So Jesus is the name, Christ is kind of the theological title that comes upon it. So,
He pointed that out to me once. If you had lived in the time of Jesus, you wouldn't have gone up with the hi, I'm Jesus.
Right.
You would have said hi, I'm Jesus, son of Joseph of Nazareth. Or
Yeah,
something
right.
like that.
well, you know the joke that Robin Williams makes where Mary comes to Joseph and says, Joseph, I know we haven't slept together, but I'm pregnant. Jesus! Hey, don't worry, it's God. It's God. It's Christ Almighty. That's his name! was started, but that's some humor for you, whoever's watching in the land. But we are talking about the Sabbath today, Rabbi Vaisberg. So, if you'll take this handout, let's get to Shabbat proper. I'm going to keep one for myself. And then Harris, you can put them down. By the way, Jennifer, just so you know, because it was asked in the last time, and Elizabeth, I don't think you were here, the intent of this class is not to convert non-Jews to Judaism. It's strictly an informational class. So somebody asked that, so I wanted to make sure that was clear as well. Okay, so this is where the idea for the Sabbath comes from. This is the most actual ideas behind it that we're going to get into because we're practical. Does anybody want to read from creation, from the book of Genesis? Fantastic.
God had finished on the seventh day his work that he had made, and then he ceased on the seventh day from all his work that he had made. God gave the seventh day his blessing, and he hallowed it, for on it he ceased from all his work that by creating God had made.
So the syntax looks a little strange, but the guy, this is Everett Fox, who did the translation, and the way he does it is he tries to have his English mirror the Hebrew syntax. So while the phrasing looks a little odd, that's how it's phrased in the Hebrew grammar with the poetic nature of it as well. So what do we have here? What is the Sabbath in Genesis?
It's a day of rest.
Day of rest for whom?
The way that God rested.
Exactly. So we learn here that the seventh, God creates, God works for 6 days. Pretty hard work making the universe. I would think it's hard work. And then the seventh day, God rests. Nothing about humankind yet. Correct? Mm-hmm. What's interesting is if you look at the Babylonian, at the Enuma-El, their version of creation, the gods created humanity so that they could rest, and on the seventh day, the humanity had to serve God. So it had to serve the gods. People didn't get to rest on the seventh day. The gods got to rest on the seventh day. So
All a matter of interpretation.
Pardon me?
It's all a matter of interpretation.
Yes, it is. But okay, so we've got that. Then we get to Leviticus, which is very much our code on how to be sacred, how human beings can be. We're all created in the image of God. So Leviticus is primarily about how we can be like God. Elizabeth, would you read for us?
Yeah.
From the second section, where it says YHWH, that is where the name of God appears as Yud He Vav He, which is often interpreted as Jehovah. So again, because of the accurate translation, we don't actually know how those 4 letters were pronounced. So Yahweh is just written
That's
here.
what I want to say. Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, the appointed times of Yahweh, which you are to proclaim to them as proclamations of holiness. These are they, my appointed times. For 6 days may work be done, but on the 7th day is Sabbath. Sabbath ceasing a proclamation of holiness any kind of work you are not to do. It is Sabbath to Yahweh throughout all your settlements."
So what's being said? What's being said in this text? We always have to paraphrase to make sure we understand.
You're not supposed to work.
Okay.
So now they're saying the people should have a day of rest.
And why are we not supposed to rest? Why are we supposed to rest? Why are we not supposed to work?
It's a holy day.
It's a day that God says this day is sacred. Why? Because God, it doesn't say, but because God stopped creating, God took this day as a sacred day. So we are commanded not to work, because for us it is a sacred day. And so we know that wherever we live, and interesting, throughout all your settlements, we had non-Jews living in our communities. Ger Toshav, so one might imply that Sabbath, when a place is strictly Jewish, that this should be observed by everybody in the community. Everybody gets a day off. Which then leads us into Deuteronomy's passage. Harris, do you want to read it? Fantastic.
Keep the day of Sabbath by hallowing it as God has commanded you. For 6 days you are to serve and to do all your work. But the 7th day is Sabbath to God. What is it? Why?
Yahweh, you can say.
Yahweh.
Yeah.
Sabbath for Yahweh your God. You are not to do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your servant, nor your maid, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your animals, nor your sojourner,
the person traveling, the traveler in a sense.
Sojourner that is in your gates, in order that your servant and your maid may rest as one like yourself.
So what does it say here?
And not only can you not work, nobody in your household can work.
Everybody gets a day of rest. Which is interesting, because if you think about it, we're in a sense servants for God. But what it's saying is, just as God, rather than serving God, per se having to do all this work, God rests, we rest. Depends how you interpret rest. But we don't do what is classified as work. And just like that, those who serve us also do not get to do what is classified as work.
So, in other words, in those days, cows still had to be milked. Whether you like it or not, that wasn't considered work.
No, that's true. Cows need to be milked, and it causes them pain if you don't milk them. But what you wouldn't do is you wouldn't have an ox or a bull used to plow fields. You wouldn't use them for manual labor.
So in that great big list of things that you're not supposed to do, like frying ox, interpost, and all that stuff, milking cows is not in there.
I don't know about that, actually. Will you send me that in email and I'll look?
I'll call you.
Okay.
Voicemail.
Let me know when it's not this time, and I'll remember to look that up. And I believe nowadays you would be able to, because we understand it's an issue of health.
I should leave that voicemail just like that. Rabbi, can I milk a cow on Shabbat?
And I'll say, will you bring me a cow on Shabbat? Okay. So we know Shabbat is about holiness, and it's about resting. So the question is, how do we make it holy? We rest, but we do a lot more than that. And the issue around serving God is interesting because we spend a lot of time in synagogue. We spend a lot of time doing things that might sound as work, but the point is that you really do work during the rest of the week, and so we differentiate. But does anybody want to read from where it says page 54?
Sure.
So I think it's a nice point to know.
One of the great tragedies of Jewish life in America is the loss of the Sabbath. Jewish life will not be restored to good health unless the Sabbath regains its sanctity and its central place.
So interesting thesis, that you need the Sabbath to really live a good, solid, spiritual, fulfilled life. You need this time. Why? Let's find out.
The decline of the Sabbath, at least in America, began through force of circumstance. Our parents and grandparents had to work on the Sabbath because of the economic pressures of the Western world. In order to hold a job, they had to work on Sabbath. What was first done by necessity, later was done voluntarily. Today, people neglect the Sabbath not because economic conditions force them to do so, but by habit and because of the increasing secularization of life.
So often, and you can read through more of this if you want, but out of need, out of necessity, we stopped doing it. We were more secular, we didn't have to do it, and now just because of habit, it's easier to do the work, it's easier to do the things that you do during life if you haven't discovered the holiness of it. In a sense, we all talk about we're enslaved to our jobs, we're enslaved to our pocketbooks, we're whatever. Pardon me? Our children. Sports practices. There are all these things that take control over our lives that the Sabbath is designed in principle to break. And so what we'll see at the bottom is Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's a very important theologian. He refers to the Sabbath as a palace in time. That it's this incredible place that you go, where ideally it's like this moment that everything sparkles. It's a moment where you find peace, you find quietude, you find, not always quiet, you might find joy, you might find raucous, wonderful, prayerful music. But everything that we talked about that Jews will do, or many Jews will do for Shabbat, is designed to create this palace in time. So first of all, let's talk about what Jews will do, what you'll find. Often people will spend time before the Sabbath preparing, creating delicacies, creating foods, cleaning their homes. I should clean my house more often. Not everybody does this, but some and many do, especially more often in traditional circles. You're looking at me curiously. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that my mother worked very hard cleaning the house before Shabbat. She would wash, the floors would get washed, and then she would put newspapers on the floor so that it wouldn't get dirty before Shabbat. Like, all of a sudden I had this image of her working hard.
People will polish their silver. People will put out traditionally white tablecloths because white was seen as purity. We have our favorite colored tablecloth that we have. It's like reds and greens and other colors. We bought it in Israel. So the idea is to make things as special as can be. Then traditionally at the start of Shabbat, at sundown, you'll then light the candles, at least 2. Why at least 2? Because we have 2 commandments about Shabbat in the Torah. Shamor at the Shabbat, you should keep Shabbat, and Zachor, you should remember Shabbat. So the rabbis say, well, how do we do both? Well, we light 2 candles, it signifies this, and somehow we can do both at once. So we light at least 2 candles. You can always light more. So some people will light 3 candles because they have a 3-candle candelabra. Some people will do 5. Here's the thing about it, though. You are never allowed to descend in holiness. So once you go up in candles, you may never go down again. So if you do 5 candles, because you have 3 children, there are 5 people in the family, you have to do 5 candles forever. So it makes you think.
And my mother, may she rest in peace, she had 5 children. 5 candles.
Amazing. Traditionally, you'll light the candles at the beginning. Then, so first I'll say what happens in traditional circles, and then I'll say what happens in different places. Then you would go to synagogue, and you have Shabbat services, which you have the regular service that is the same as all the other nights in the week, which for those who pray, the Baruch Hu marks the beginning of the regular service. But you add this whole section before, it's called Kabbalat Shabbat, where you sing psalms, you sing different poems that were written. It's essentially a different service that really celebrates the welcoming of the moment. We personify Shabbat as a bride. It's kind of seen as a mystical union for those who were very mystical. We often find it easy we often find it meaningful to anthropomorphize, to treat things as if they are beings, as if they're people, in the same way that many of us, especially children, have a very easy time understanding God as somebody that looks a little bit like Zeus with a big white beard, because it's easier to understand. And so one of the ways that we relate to Shabbat is the bride of Israel, that we are in love with Shabbat. Because it is something that you look forward to all week, that you just want to bring out there. And so in Tzfat, which is a mystical city in Israel, the ancient mystics would actually put on their whites, their best clothing, and run out to the fields to greet the sunset with song, because they were so excited. And so we have this whole service, Kabbalat Shabbat, that is a very mystical service that really marks the beginning of this moment. So we pray, and then you go home. And sometimes you'll eat together as a synagogue, sometimes you'll go home, and just like with the candles, and by the way, the candles themselves aren't holy, it's the blessing that you say over them, because with a blessing, you take the mundane and you elevate it to something spiritual. Are you still following?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So
Kind of lost.
So do you have a specific question?
No.
Okay. So we light candles, then we pray. Then we go, and there are 2 more things. We always sanctify moments with wine. So wine or grape juice, because we know that we do have children, and we also have people with addictions to alcohol. And so we have the option to have grape juice too. But you use a grape product. It's seen as something sacred as well. So you make a blessing to mark the sacred occasion for Shabbat with wine. And then what do you do when you meet people? You break bread. So we also, there'll be a special cup for wine, by the way. And then we have, are you all familiar with challah? Have you ever had egg bread, some people call it?
Yes, it's challah bread.
Okay. Yeah. I know
So often it'll be braided. Not every culture makes it braided. And you'll know that at Rosh Hashanah, at the New Year, we'll often have it circular. challah technically just means that a section of the dough was removed and burnt to signify what happened in the temple way back when. So traditionally it has evolved into a braid because really it's just making the nicest bread that we can for Shabbat. And traditionally you'll have 2 loaves rather than 1 because you have a loaf. Back when people broke bread with every meal, you would have 1 loaf of bread for every meal. So Shabbat, again, the goal is to make everything as special as possible. You have 2. You have 2, just like in the, sorry, can I get to you in one moment? Just like in the desert when the Israelites were supposed to collect manna, which was this magical stuff that fell from heaven that supposedly tasted like honey, and you loved eating honey all the time. There would be enough that fell on the ground for everybody to pick up for the day. But on Friday, we were supposed to collect 2 portions because you're not allowed to collect things. That's work. On Saturday. So they would have 2 things that would last, and then they'd get back to Sunday, and they would start collecting 1 at a time. So we have 2 loaves of bread to signify that you have the double portion, so you're not working. Jennifer, your question?
I have 2 questions. So this is done every Saturday? Like, when does it start?
It starts Friday night at sundown. So in the summer, it would start at 9 o'clock sometimes. Now, Shabbat starts around 4:15 because it's the winter. So whenever sundown starts.
Okay, so, but I don't understand why you can't watch TV or talk on the phone. I have a friend that's Jewish, and she tells me she can't talk on the phone and watch TV.
I promise you I will get to that. I'll get to that a little bit later. I wanted to talk about what we do first before I talk about what we don't do. But it's a good question.
Again, it goes back to interpretation.
Exactly. But it also, I'll explain why it makes sense. It doesn't, I don't observe all of that, but I understand how we got to that. So you have services, you go home, and then you'll have a big festive meal, which is, different people will observe it in different ways. Usually, especially back when meat was a precious commodity, people would eat meat on Shabbat. And now you often have people who, with being health conscious, you don't want to eat as much meat. Some people will be meat minimalist and only eat meat on Shabbat or on special occasions. You'll have a wonderful delicacy. So, and you'll eat way into the night, and after dinner, we're always supposed to pray after a meal. You pray beforehand, a little prayer to give thanks, but it's a quick thanks because you're hungry, and then afterwards you pray for longer because you have more time and you really know what you're appreciating. So we'll say something called Birkat Hamazon, and sometimes it's accompanied by singing. That there'll be songs that you might sing when you go to Shabbat dinner. I'm hoping to bring that to Temple Emanu-El because it's fun to sing together. Then you go to sleep, and actually, all the teenagers love this point. It is to have sex with your spouse is a mitzvah. It's a commandment. It's seen as an extra special commandment to do that on the Sabbath because it's as if you are elevated, as if you have 2 souls, and making love at this time when it's such a special time of love is seen to be extra holy. So that is something that is encouraged on Friday nights as well. But
Which
if
of
you
all
are...
the laws in the whole book, my husband, may he rest in peace, always reminded me that it's a blessing. I said, really? Talk to me next to Vishwa. Don't bother me.
Yeah. However, if you are a non-Jew visiting Jews on Shabbat, you may not be privy to that part of the Sabbath. We do not encourage that because we also have a tremendous value for modesty in Judaism.
Do they wait till the kids go to bed?
I do not have children, so I do not know yet. I would
Are you
hope so.
kidding?
Yeah.
Wait till they're out.
Unless you're one of those families that are all like, our kids should know about that, but that's strange.
No.
No, absolutely not. Then you wake up, and you go to synagogue in the morning. In traditional circles, in the temple there was an extra sacrifice for Shabbat. It's called Musaf, which means additional. So services in conservative and Orthodox synagogues will be longer because they have this extra section. And then you'll have another meal. And you get to eat, and again you pray, you have some Smirah. Then some people will go to synagogue some more. A lot of people will take a nap. A lot of people will take that time for family time. You find a way to rest. And then some...
You read and study.
Exactly. You might read, you might study. Things that fall within the realm of Shabbat. After that, have you guys heard of Seudat Shlishit?
What?
Seudat Shlishit.
Yeah.
So what is it?
It's an extra meal that you have just before the end of Shabbat.
Exactly. Traditionally, or not traditionally, in old times, people would have two meals, one in the morning, one in the evening. Can you imagine not ever having lunch? It would be really sad. But this is how they did things. Maybe they had a snack, I don't know. But so Shabbat, you get to have an extra meal. You have a third meal. And so this is often seen as the meal that you usually do this before sundown. It leads into that last service that we'll get to. But often it's with sweets. It's supposed to elevate your soul for one last bit on this holy day. And sometimes there'll be storytelling, sometimes there'll be singing. It's a really wonderful occasion. And last, you'll conclude Shabbat with another service at sundown called Havdalah. Liv Havdil is the verb, and it means to separate. And so, just as you have a beginning to Shabbat, you have an end that brings you back into the rest of the week. So you usually do it with a braided candle. You do it with wine, and you have spices that are, the spices are almost like smelling salts because you're coming down spiritually. So the idea is that Shabbat is something very sacred that we should do, but you shouldn't spend all your time doing it. Work is appropriate. Work, you're supposed to do work. You're not supposed to sit around like a bum all week. But you also need that day to replenish your soul, to be holy and to connect with God. And so there are all these rituals that go into there to make that happen. Some Jews will do some of that. Sometimes we'll vary it up. In Reform Judaism, which is where we are, rather than having the service fluctuate with the time that Shabbat starts, because we know that a lot of people work and will work past 4:15, we tend to make the service at set times. And so a lot of people will have dinner before the service if the service is at 8 o'clock at night. My wife and I, on the other hand, will always have dinner after the service because we want to be able to sit around and really have some nice food and have some scotch. So different people form different practices. Some people will pray after meals, some people won't. But why I told you everything is that way when any Jewish house that you go to, you may see some of these things. Also, if a kid is having a bar or bat mitzvah, it'll usually be on Shabbat because that's when people are free. Technically, you could do a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah on any day when Torah is read. Would have been cheaper on a Monday. By the way,
Well, is it on Monday that they do it at the wall in Israel?
they can do it either Monday or Thursday. Torah is traditionally
There's a
read.
big
The
thing.
Bible. The Torah is the Bible. And it's in the scroll. It's traditionally read on Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays in the morning. Why Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays? Saturdays because it's Shabbat. Monday and Thursday because that's when people went to the market. So they would read in the market. It was a very practical decision. So before we get to the things that you don't do on Shabbat, are there any questions about the things that you do?
Did you say there was a sacrifice? No.
So in the temple, there were 2 daily sacrifices. There was, and by the way, there's also in traditional circles an afternoon service called mincha. There were 2 sacrifices. There was the morning sacrifice, shacharit, which is the name for a morning service, and there was the afternoon sacrifice, mincha, which is the name for our afternoon service. Ma'ariv, we do because it's the evening and we have this convoluted way of matching it up, but there wasn't an evening sacrifice. However, for holy days, like Shabbat, like the holidays, they would add an extra sacrifice to God to make sure that it was special.
What kind of sacrifice?
They would sacrifice kosher animals. They would also sacrifice good olive oil, and they would make these cakes that were supposedly good, but sing the recipe. I don't believe it.
What do you do now?
What do we do now? Worship has replaced sacrifice. Sacrifice was their form of worship. My theory is that God didn't need a sacred barbecue. My term for the sacrifice is a sacred barbecue. Because here's the thing: we sacrifice the animals. Some of it was offered as a burnt offering, but a lot of it then went after the parts to God were offered. They went to feed the priests. So it was also a way of tithing to the religious establishment. Are you guys following?
I'm lost.
I get it. Because the priest didn't work.
Yeah, the priests couldn't have jobs because their jobs were to make everybody feel whole. Take care of that.
They had to.
In the Zohar, it says
Keep
that.
on asking, by the way, if I'm missing something.
I always wondered about the sacrifice stuff. And in the Zohar, it says that when God and man are interfacing, there's light involved. And that the demons are attracted to the light, but they're also attracted to blood. So they would use the blood to keep the demons out of man and God's interface.
I believe that that's there. I don't know that text myself, but that would make sense.
I could find it. It also
Zohar is a major mystical text that you use.
and they said that grapes have more light in them. The light that comes down from God. For some reason, there's more in grapes.
This is all interpretation later
You
on.
make it too long.
Pardon?
Maybe.
That is
Well,
all
light
lighting.
is often a metaphor for sacred energy. There's an idea that grapes are more sacred, probably because they can make you drunk.
Getting back to the part about what you can and can't do on Shabbat, I look at Shabbat as a time to do things that I don't do during the week. So if I run to get my mail during the week, I don't do that on Shabbat. Whatever it is, bills or whatever, can wait until Sunday. So that I don't do. But little by little, I put only the things that are meaningful into Shabbat.
Amazing.
I don't. If it's enjoyable to me, then I will do it. Like I like to crochet, but as a child, I was brought up as an Orthodox Jew, and we weren't allowed to do that. But now I do.
Before we talk more about it, I want to introduce the concept.
Okay.
I'm not working.
There's Orthodox Jew.
So you have different
I'm sorry.
It's okay. That's a good
Okay.
question. You have different kinds of Jews. You have some who won't be classified, but you also have movements. It's not really fully equivalent, but you have Catholic Christians, you have Protestant Christians. I guess Presbyterian would be a form of Protestant. You have all sorts of Christians. So Orthodox Jews tend to take the letter of the law and interpretation the most literally, and they tend to be the most rigid in their observance.
Is that where kosher and non-kosher comes into?
Kosher, no, we all have those kinds of laws, every group of Jews. It's just we all treat those laws in a different manner. Kosher and non-kosher comes from the Torah. Orthodox might be more inflexible on it. Like the Orthodox won't be flexible with the rules of what is work and what is not work when it comes to Shabbat. You have conservative Jews who follow the law, but they believe that the law can be changed. And you have us who are Reformed Jews, where we see that the law is part of the teachings of Judaism. We are divinely commanded to engage in the law, but it doesn't have a veto over our lives. It's one of the ways that we consider in order to find meaning in life. To be holy, we find ways to connect with God. But if I don't believe that if Brian eats bacon that he's going to be struck down by lightning. Most Orthodox Jews don't believe that Brian will be struck down by lightning either. I think the crazy people do. But what it is that I believe that not eating bacon is a way that I connect with the people. It's a way that I connect with God. But if somebody who's Jewish chooses to eat bacon, that's okay too. It's not a way that they're connected. I encourage every Jew to think about not eating bacon, but that doesn't mean every Jew needs to do it. An Orthodox Jew, only my own suggestion, an Orthodox Jew would say that, like, of course you're not going to be struck down, but if you're going to be Jewish and if you're going to do the right thing is to follow the laws, the legal structure that our people have been doing and that God wants of us. Does that clarify it for you? So, what happened is we're told not to do work. The rabbis say, what the heck is qualified as work? So they came up. Did I write down the 39 malachot? I did not write down the 39 malachot. They said, well, what's the best work that we can think of, the best form of creation that we did? Anything that was involved in building the temple. Because it was a work of construction, but it involved everything that we knew. There were agricultural things in place because people had to eat. So there's harvesting, there's threshing. I when I'm making salad on Shabbat, if I forget to cut the herbs off my plant, cutting the herbs off is literally something that the rabbis actually tell you you're not allowed to do. It's not even extrapolation. You're not allowed to light a fire because that is a form of creation. The way Talashkin, if you look at this page, talks about it. What I really like is Rabbi Abraham chose to define the work, malacha, which is the Hebrew word for work, as applying to work involving the production, creation, or transformation of an object.
Oh.
Anything that will actively change the state of one thing into something else is deemed work. Because what do? What did God do? God created. And so the point, according to that system, because creation is deemed as work, is you don't do anything that wouldn't be work. For an example with cooking is that you can leave things being heated over Shabbat. I'm talking about traditional rules right now. You can leave things being heated over Shabbat, but you can't start the cooking process knowing that it's going to continue cooking. I can't put in a slow roast at 5 minutes before Shabbat and say, it's okay, I started this, Shabbat hasn't started yet, because the primary change process is designed at that point to happen during Shabbat. And as a Jew, I initiated that. If a non-Jew who isn't required to observe Shabbat initiates that, that's their own business. And
what about that they would cook all day long?
Yes, but cholent, you have to start it before the Sabbath begins, and it's at such a low heat that really enough of the process has to happen before the Sabbath, that it doesn't really change the state of it all that much. It has to be a minimal state change. Bread, you can keep it warming in the oven, but you can't literally cook it.
You can't have it rising or something.
Exactly.
You can just keep it warm after it's rising.
Exactly. Now there are, some of you may have heard the term that, I don't know if it's derogatory or not, it might be a Sabbath goy, which means a non-Jew who Jews would often say, like, who would often come and do things for Jews on Shabbat that they couldn't do. They would turn on and off lights.
I don't like that expression.
Yeah, I don't like it either, but that's often, if you've heard that term, that's a term that a lot of people
I know, we had that.
Yeah. Goy is often seen as a derogatory term for Goyim literally means the nations, the ones that are not Jewish. But often it's seen as more derogatory. Oh, you're not Jewish, so if somebody calls you Goy, you can punch them in the face. That's for the podcast. I don't sanction violence, actually. But here's the thing, that you cannot actually ask a non-Jew to do work, because then they are initiating the process of work. It's simply that there might be a nice non-Jew who lives in the area who wants to help out their Jewish neighbors. So it can be a little convoluted. Anyway, so you're not supposed to do these work things, but one way that we look at that as well is, what is Shabbat about? If we are not exactly bound by that law, and we want to create a day that's really for elevating the spirit and separating from the work, it may be that you have a different way of celebrating it. You wouldn't typically drive via the TV because, hello.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'll sit on this side.
Oh, okay.
I thought it starts at 7:30.
6:30 actually. We technically, class is over in a minute, but it's 6:30 to 7:20. But it's nice to meet you, Rabbi Vaisberg.
Nice to meet you, Joe.
Good to meet you.
Yeah.
But I'll give you a package.
Doesn't something else start at 7:30?
Yeah.
I don't know what it starts
Yeah, I
at
think there is something else.
Question.
Yes.
Before you said that having sex on the Sabbath is a blessing.
Yeah.
And you know, so. But here it says you can't create.
Yeah.
And technically it's possible to be creating if you're doing that on the Sabbath.
Yes, but really, if you're going by this line of thinking, this is not my line of thinking, what happens at that point, the fertilization in a sense, is something that happens involuntarily at that point as a product of your enjoyment, of your love. And the idea of sex on Shabbat is not to procreate, it is to express your love for each other.
I understand that, but the creation process might take place whether you want it or not.
Yes, whether you want it or not is the operative term. You don't know if it's going to happen. Therefore, you are not actually initiating work. What I would say then, according to this argument, is that you're not allowed to have sex to try to get pregnant on Shabbat.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true or not, but according to this, if you're not trying to get pregnant, sex is seen as higher than that because it's an expression of love. It should be an expression of love. You should not use sex for anything that's not love.
Is this an occasional meeting, or is it every Monday?
Almost every Monday. Sergio
I'll
would make a we'll show you a calendar. Occasionally I'm out of town and there's a holiday, but yeah, we'll be having this again next Monday.
I see.
Yeah. So
at 6 o'clock. Or
6:30. Absolutely. So anyway, just to finish up, so liberal Jews will often, rather than taking the letter of that, liberal Jews would include Reform Jews, would include conservative Jews. We take elements of not working and we say, what really isn't working for me? Is TV not working? I would argue that TV isn't always in the spirit of Shabbat because while it is resting, it doesn't elevate your spirit in the same way that maybe really speaking with family, singing together, maybe it does elevate your spirit. For me, it doesn't elevate my spirit, so it's not in the idea of Shabbat. Maybe going to the zoo with your loved ones, going on a nice walk, reading a good book, maybe that elevates. But in the spirit of it, we take a full day to find ways to elevate our soul and be with people we care about.
When you say good in a higher spirit, is that any different than being in a good mood?
You're deliberately, because it's not only about you, you're deliberately finding a way to connect with God and to connect with other people. You're explicitly creating that space and that time for yourself. I'll give you the text so that way you can look it over a little bit. Does anyone have any other quick questions?
Why if you're Jews and you don't do Sabbath?
What if you're Jewish and you don't observe the Sabbath?
Yeah.
Then that's your own problem.
Then
you become a secular Jew.
Well, in my view of Judaism is that Judaism provides a way to make life tremendously meaningful. That's what religion does. It connects you to something that's greater than yourself. For me, Judaism is the right path for that. So if you don't do Shabbat, I think you're missing out. I don't think anything bad's going to happen to you other than that you're not getting the great benefit that comes from really making this day a regular practice in your life.
Could you explain to her what a secular Jew is?
A secular Jew is somebody who is Jewish by identification but doesn't really practice the religion. Yeah.
So what are you talking about next week?
Next week, we are talking about the Jewish calendar, the flow of the holidays and how it works. Pardon me? Yeah. So tune in next week, folks, where we will be talking about the Jewish calendar.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, you could. Yeah.
This class tonight?
Yeah. Sergio, are you posting these online, or what are we doing with these videos?
Yes.
Where online are you posting?
It'll be up on YouTube, on our Facebook page. I'll send you the links. You can post it with the Temple has a place to share with the congregation.
No, we can do it.
Is that what's called congregation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Nice meeting you both.
You too.
Take care.
We're looking forward to seeing y'all next week.
It's not a sin for us to do this.
No, it's not. Traditional Jews might call it a sin. Actually, they would call it a sin if you're violating the law. I don't see it quite like that. Well, I have to get